Okay, this is a video to show how to use an angle grinder to cut porcelain tile. Now this is a Craftsman disc grinder. It comes with a grinding disc. It's designed for grinding metal and it's used in this manner. You do not use the edge of this. This one is designed for a type 27 or depressed center disc. So the way the discs mount on this style is like this. There's this backing disc, which is also depressed. There's this, the grinding wheel, which is a depressed center wheel. And then there's this locking nut, which has fits over. In this particular one, it's a 5/8 inch arbor and 7/8 inch hole on the grinding disc. And that's how that works. Now, it is possible to convert this for use as a cutting instrument rather than a grinding or polishing type instrument. Okay, one way to do it is to find a cutting wheel that has a depressed center. I had to cut some metal working on a car one time, and I saw this at the hardware store. It was a cutting disc, and I said, oh, this looks great. It's a depressed center, so it fits right on to, well, I shouldn't say that it fits right on. I'm sorry, I didn't put the backing disc on. Yeah, no, it does fit right on. Backing, it fits right. It's a Type 27, so it's actually designed for this particular standard. And it locks in here. And the locking piece is actually below the surface here, but that won't matter because you're going to use it as at the edge of it as cutting. Now, one thing about this is when you're using this for cutting, and I didn't even realize when I did it, it's potentially dangerous. I suppose it's potentially dangerous in either case, but I'm guessing that when you're grinding or polishing, there's less risk of a disc, let's say, fracturing and splintering and flying out in all directions. Probably because the disc is much thicker. When you're cutting it, you might have a very thin disc like this one. This one is 45 thousandths. And when it shatters, the pieces could fly out. So what I've since learned is that it's possible to get a shield. This shield is designed as a shield for the grinding application, okay? But for a cutting application, the shield actually covers over the face of this. So you could still actually, I suppose, use some of it for grinding. But in covering it, if the disc were to shatter, it would prevent the pieces from flying out. This one doesn't have that. So there's a safety issue. Like I said, I didn't even realize that when I bought this because it was a depressed center disc, and I said, oh, okay, well, this must be designed for this. So I got it. Now, I have a project now where I needed to cut porcelain tile. There are probably lots of ways to do that, but after doing some research and checking online, I discovered this way of doing it. So here is a porcelain tile 4-inch disc. This is a 4.5-inch disc grinder, so a 4-inch disc will fit. Okay, but there's a problem. It's not a depressed center, which means if I were to try to put it on here, for example, there's not enough purchase to actually screw a nut onto that. Okay, so this can't be used this way. Fortunately, there is an adapter that you can buy. So here's an adapter. It's designed for a dewalt angle grinder. But it turns out it fits on my Sears Craftsman because they're probably pretty standard. So the way the adapter works, it's got a 5/8 inch hole in it, and it's compatible with this 5/8 inch arbor. And it's not a depressed style or just very minor. It has a little notch in it, but it doesn't have this big profile, so that when you put on now your cutting disc, what you find is that there is screws that you can screw onto, okay? And there's still a problem though, because in the previous setup, this thing had this what do you call it, a collar that would fit into the 7/8 inch hole on here. Now, you could conceivably try using that on here, and the reason for that is this is actually designed to fit 5/8 of an inch or 7/8 of an inch or even 20 millimeters. It actually comes with an adapter locking ring for 20 millimeters. So for 7/8, you just knock this out. Then this would fit through that. And in theory, it would lock into this collar, but in practice, it doesn't. The reason is because here's where the dewalt and the Craftsman are not compatible. This piece does not lock into it, and this porcelain disc is too thin. This works only for thicker cutting discs. It does not work for this one. Okay, but there is still a solution in hand, and that is to take this lock ring and you actually turn it upside down. Now it works because there is enough purchase on this so that when it's upside down, even though you don't get that collar going into the 7/8 inch hole, you still get enough screws to hold it down. Now it's true, you don't get, there are a couple threads that you do not get at the end. Okay, so you might say, oh, it's not ideal. Well, that's true enough, but it does lock down. I didn't have a problem with it. Now, the other issue you might run into is now that it's upside down, the actual tool that it comes with doesn't actually fit properly to lock it. Okay, but it turns out that is not the end of the world, because if you put in the axle locker, it turns out, and this is actually a quite common thing, if you wanted to tighten this, if you move this all the way to the tighten position, it will lock against the housing. Okay, if you then put in even just one hole into the tool will actually push against the shoulder. So people familiar with working on bicycles will notice this same sort of technique. The very same tool here can be used to tighten this down, because the tool itself, even on one hole, provides torque to turn this down. And I didn't have a problem tightening this enough. And untightening it also, you have to put more force on it. And in theory, you could, enlarge those holes a little bit, or you might deform the tool a little bit, but I didn't notice either of those things happening in this case. Neither of those things happened. It's not as good as having a tool which fits on both sides, but I just didn't have one, so this worked fine. Now that you have this, you do have the same issue. You don't have the same safety factor that you would have on a shield designed for cutoff wheel, but primarily this will not be for your own protection, because you'll be using it this way. It's for anybody that would be standing out in that area. So basic idea is you wouldn't have anybody out there. That's the idea. Now, the way that this could be used in cutting tile, so I had a mosaic mat on my project. So basically, I use this in place of a wet saw, for example, and I would cut through the mat. In this particular case, for example, to cut through the mat only required cutting basically only a number of tiles would have to be cut. Not all of them would have to be cut, because some of them end at that point anyway. And it could be used in place of a wet saw. I think it's fantastic. The disc only costs $22. Here's another slightly different application where, yeah, you want to cut it, and you don't actually want to cut right through one of the grout lines on the mat. This would be for a purpose where you're going up against a wall and you actually need a slightly different dimension. So you notice the piece, this of course is the piece that wasn't used. In the other piece, I couldn't have an entire full tile because it hit a wall. So I actually cut right through, in this case, about 1/4 of a tile off in order to get the correct fit against the wall. I'm using a 1/2 inch baseboard the individual tile unit is about 3/4 of an inch, so in many cases, I will need to cut these in half or even into fourths. Or if you want to cut out a corner, you can cut in both directions. Now you will damage, let's say, one tile, but of course this is the scrap piece you're not using. And on the toilet bowl, it's even possible to cut a circle. Now you could cut a circle a couple ways. One of them is to do this thing kind of in a vertical direction and then just work it around, and you'll end up with something that is going to be a little bit like an octagon maybe, or something like that. It's also possible to get something that's even more curved by putting the grinder at an angle, and an angle cut, because it's a circular disc and it can actually make a circular cut. And I've seen people on YouTube doing that. Now, I would say, and I did do some of that when I was doing it. I wasn't thinking too much at the time, but I will say this. I'm sure that that's probably more dangerous, because when you're doing that, the porcelain disc is not really, I don't think it's designed for doing that. I think it's designed for cutting edge only. And at this particular point, you're putting it at an angle. And the stress that is putting, I got too much sun here, but the stress that is putting on the disc, if the disc were to shatter, for example, then the pieces could fly out. And it might be in a direction in which you might actually be looking at it, because you're looking to see exactly where the cutting edge. On all these applications, your eye will be trained on where it's cutting. So in this case here, where it's at an angle, I would say that's more dangerous. Of course, wear safety gloves and safety goggles, certainly, when you're doing any cutting with this. But I only mentioned this one here. I did see it online. It is a little bit clever. I did actually do it, but then I had second thoughts after I did it, and I was preparing this video, and I realized that even if this had the safety guard, it doesn't go around all the way. The guard obviously is not in place for the point at which the cut is. But once it shatters, who knows? It could come off in all directions. So just be careful on that one. Okay, that's it. Thanks.